Ladies and gentlemen, wishing you a peaceful night full of rest and relaxation. Tonight we begin with a story woven from incense smoke, red silk ribbons, and letters never meant for the living eye. Tonight we wander into a world where the dead still marry, where parents whisper to ashes as if they might whisper back, and where, even after death, one's social obligations continue. You're going to need your slippers for this one, because you'll be tiptoeing through ancestral halls, past tables set for invisible guests, and into the pages of letters addressed to the underworld. And no, you probably wouldn't survive this in real life, unless you're handy with a burning brazier and very polite to ghosts. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in a dusty antique shop tucked between an abandoned dumpling house and a karaoke bar where no one sings anymore. The smell hits you first. Mothballs, old incense, and paper left to yellow under the slow breath of time. You don't remember why you came in. Maybe you just needed to be somewhere forgotten. The shopkeeper is asleep, or dead. You're honestly not sure. Pushed to the back corner is a Qing-era writing desk, lacquer chipped, drawers misaligned. But it's the thin red ribbon, peeking out like a whisper under the lowest drawer, that catches your eye. Tug gently. A bundle of letters falls out, bound in silk and soot. Someone took care to seal them, each with a wax mark pressed into red cinnabar. You can just make out the characters. Gui Hun Shu. Ghost marriage letters. You pause. Is this a prank? A prop? A marketing gimmick for incense? Nope. The letters are real. Their paper brittle but neat, like they've been waiting. Written by shaky hands, some on rice paper, others scrawled in crayon by what looks like a grieving sibling. They begin with polite formalities, always polite, but quickly dive into requests. Please accept our daughter taken too young, one reads, as a match for your beloved son. Another reads simply, my son is cold, he needs company. We offer our niece. Some are poems, aching and strange. She danced under the plum trees. Now she waits beneath them. Send a bride to her roots. Let her spirit blossom again. A shiver climbs your neck. Not fear, exactly. Something older. The kind of hush you feel at a graveside. You realize these aren't just letters. They're applications, proposals, promises. The opening dialogue of marriages arranged not for the living, but between the dead. Historians still argue whether these ghost marriages were born from Confucian filial piety or older animistic beliefs in the lingering needs of the soul. Either way, it's clear. In parts of China, as far back as the Han Dynasty, people believed the dead could still be restless, especially if they died unmarried. A son without a bride? Doomed to wander. A daughter passed without a husband? Her spirit could turn bitter, even dangerous. You pull out one more letter. It's more recent, dated just 50 years ago. The handwriting is bold. A factory worker, perhaps. It reads, we send you Chunmei, who never wore wedding shoes. Let her have them now. You look closer. There's something wrapped inside. Small, light, a bit of fabric. You unfold it carefully. A miniature silk shoe. Embroidered. Never worn. Quirky as it sounds, some families really did send tiny symbolic items, shoes, combs, pieces of hair, with these letters. Gifts to the other side. Occasionally, even cash was folded in, joss money meant for the spirit world. It's all a bit much, you think, and yet not. What's stranger? Burning a letter for a ghost bride or pretending grief ends cleanly at a funeral. You start to feel the air shift. The shop's silence thickens like steamed rice. You tuck the letters back, not sure what rule of etiquette you might be breaking. But you do it gently, respectfully, the way you'd smooth a blanket over someone sleeping. Outside, the sky has turned the color of old ash. You step out into the dusk and the city seems quieter than it should, as if waiting. You've opened the first page of a long, slow story. One written in ashes, whispered between graves, and bound, always, by red silk. The next morning, you find yourself somewhere between curiosity and sleep deprivation. You barely remember how you got the number, but now you're following a set of vague directions to a neighborhood that hasn't appeared on any digital map since the invention of Wi-Fi. You pass alleys that get narrower with every turn, until the modern world fades behind laundry lines and the soft rattle of bird cages. She's waiting for you on a stool so old it might be part of the earth. Her eyes are soft but sharp, like someone who can spot lies by the way you shift your weight. She's wrapped in layers of muted gray and a whisper of red silk at her collar. She nods once, without surprise. You found the letters. Of course she already knows. Her name is Madame Wei, at least that's what people call her, and she is, quite literally, a matchmaker for the dead. She invites you in without ceremony. Her tiny parlor smells like jasmine, dust, and warm ink. A cat that may or may not be alive watches you from under a table. On the wall, pinned between faded calendars and red paper charms, hang dozens of tiny portraits, sketched, not photographed. Young women with serious eyes, boys in military caps, a few with no face at all, just names. These are the unmarried, she says. Not were, are. In traditional ghost marriage, families approached someone like Madame Wei when their child died unmarried. The belief, a soul denied the rights of marriage might remain earthbound, restless, even vengeful. But when properly wed, even posthumously, the spirit could finally enter the afterlife's family tree, complete with in-laws, rituals, and hopefully a sense of belonging. But Madame Wei's job isn't just matchmaking. No, she must navigate the complex etiquette of pairing dead strangers whose families often disagree on everything, from dowry offerings to preferred burial plots. Today's task: arranging a marriage between two spirits who died in different decades, one in 1967, the other in 2004. The living relatives have agreed on most things, except the dress. You sit cross-legged on a bamboo mat as Madame Wei flips through a dusty binder filled with fabric swatches and ceremonial garb designs. The groom's family wants red robes with phoenix embroidery. The bride's family insists she always hated red. You offer a helpful, maybe pink? She doesn't laugh. Instead, she sighs and starts sketching a compromise outfit. It's delicate work, filled with symbolism. Every detail matters. What colors to burn, what charms to include, even which paper figurines to fold. You didn't think ghosts would be fussy. You were wrong. Historians still argue whether ghost marriage was originally a form of spiritual protection or a desperate tool to maintain lineage records. Some believe it evolved during the Zhou dynasty, when ancestor worship grew complex and the need to complete a family through rituals became deeply ingrained. People think it's just superstition, Madame Wei says, gently pressing cinnabar ink into a marriage registration scroll. But it's no different than the living needing closure. We send text messages, they send incense smoke. She rolls the scroll and tucks it into a ceremonial pouch made of woven bamboo. This pouch will later be burned with offerings, money, miniature furniture, a carved bed. sometimes even tiny passports to the underworld. You point to a nearby shelf where dozens of ceramic dolls sit. Some wear wedding dresses. Some are missing faces. All of them have names handwritten on their feet. Madame Wei explains that these represent the spirits, stand-ins for the bride and groom during the ritual. After the wedding, they're usually buried or burned. But sometimes, she adds, the families keep them, especially if they feel the spirits aren't ready to go. You raise an eyebrow. Ready to go where? She smiles in a way that says, don't ask questions you don't want spiritual answers to. Then, suddenly she turns serious. Not every ghost wants to be married, but families. She taps the desk with one long nail. They rarely ask. A breeze picks up. It rattles the paper charms on her windows and makes a few dolls tilt forward like sleepy guests. Madame Wei doesn't notice, or pretends not to. She hands you a letter to carry to the burning altar later. You'll take this to the fire. That's how we send it. But don't fold it. Spirits don't read creased paper. Naturally, as you leave her parlor, you can't help but think how much this all resembles dating apps. Families choosing based on a few flattering facts, matching timelines, hoping for spiritual chemistry. The only difference? No one's ghosting anyone. Quite the opposite, in fact. Outside, the alley smells of steamed buns and burnt offerings. The air hangs thick with a warmth you can't explain. You tuck the letter into your coat. It's addressed not to a home, but a grave. And somehow you already know the way. You arrive at the altar just before dusk. It's nestled behind a faded temple, half swallowed by banyan roots and the kind of ivy that looks like it's been creeping for centuries. There's no sign, no plaque, just the unmistakable presence of a place that exists between worlds. The incense here smells older, more serious, like sandalwood, and something that might once have been tears. You pause, letter in hand. The pouch Madame Wei gave you is surprisingly heavy for something meant to be burned, perhaps because of the tiny ceramic coin inside, or maybe the sheer gravity of what it's meant to do. You kneel, because that's what people do here. No one has to teach you. You place the letter on the edge of the iron brazier. It's round, soot-black, and rests atop a squat pile of bricks. Offerings from earlier today still smolder. Joss paper folded into money. A paper laptop, version 2010 judging by the clunky design, and even what appears to be a paper car. Luxury model. You light a match. The flame hesitates, then flickers greedily across the pouch. It curls the bamboo, licks the ink, and pulls the words into ash. You watch it all go up. The name of a bride who died at 19, the hopes of a family who never stopped speaking to her, and a match made not in heaven, but between tombstones. Historians still argue whether the original ghost marriage letters were ever meant to be read by anyone. Some claim they were just ritual formalities, symbolic gestures to smooth the way for uneasy souls. Others believe they carried coded messages meant for the living, apologies, regrets, secret loves turned public only after death. Either way, the letters keep getting written. That much hasn't changed. You lean back and notice someone else at the edge of the courtyard, a man, maybe in his 60s, wearing a buttoned vest and the expression of someone trying to appear casual about heartbreak. He holds a red envelope in his hands. You nod at each other, nothing more. After a moment, he kneels beside you and places his envelope into the fire. It's simpler than yours. Plain red paper, no seal. He whispers something you don't catch. It sounds like a name. The flames receive it with a soft hiss. The man watches for a beat, then stands. You expect him to walk away, but instead he speaks softly without looking at you. She died before the wedding, 7 days before. They'd already sent out the invitations. You don't say anything. He doesn't need a reply. We married them anyway, he adds, in the middle of the funeral. You blink. Is that allowed? He smiles, but only halfway. Depends on who you ask. The priest objected. Her grandmother insisted. My son, he swallows. He said nothing, but she would have worn red. It's one of those things you'll think about weeks later while washing dishes or waiting at a stoplight. A wedding held beside a coffin. A red dress folded over ashes. The sound of fire eating grief page by page. You walk home slowly, feeling the evening settle around you like a too big coat. You try not to think about the way Madame Wei's dolls seemed to turn their heads as you left. You definitely don't think about the breeze that tugged at your collar during the burning, even though there was no wind. Instead, you wonder what kind of culture builds a marriage tradition around the idea that death doesn't mean disconnection, that love, obligation, and even awkward family negotiations continue after the burial. In ancient Chinese households, ancestral tablets were placed at the family altar, each one representing a deceased relative, complete with titles, dates, and the occasional flowery tribute. These weren't just decorative. They were spoken to, consulted, even asked for blessings. Ghost marriages added a peculiar twist. If a son died unmarried, his tablet couldn't join the family shrine properly. He needed a bride to complete his soul's social journey. Some ghost weddings even involved a full bridal procession. Paper sedan chairs carried through town, complete with musicians. The entire ritual culminated at the gravesite, where the paper bride and groom were united, then burned. Their ashes mingled, their names joined on an ancestral scroll. Quirky detail. In certain rural areas, families used to hire mediums to communicate with the potential ghost spouses. If the medium laughed during trance, it meant the spirit was pleased. If she cried, the match was rejected. Somewhere between Tinder and the Sixth Sense. You wonder how many of those matches were truly approved, and how many were arranged more out of guilt, social pressure, or fear. Because if a ghost didn't want to be married, well, the consequences could range from eerie dreams to full-blown hauntings. No one wants a poltergeist daughter-in-law. The moon rises as you reach your street. It feels heavier now, like someone's watching, but kindly, maybe even protectively. You check your coat pocket. It's empty. You knew it would be. But still, you expected to find that little shoe. You leave the door unlocked tonight, just in case she visits. Your dreams that night are strange, but not frightening. You float through corridors draped in red silk. Paper lanterns sway in slow motion. At one point, you're holding a parasol that's dissolving into ash, and when you look down, your reflection stares back from a pond full of ink. Somewhere in the distance, a flute plays a tune that loops endlessly but never repeats. When you wake, the scent of burnt joss paper still lingers in your nostrils. You stretch, shuffle to the window, and spot something odd on the sill. A strip of red paper creased once down the middle with a hand-drawn character for double happiness. It's the kind of decoration typically pasted at weddings. And now it's here in your second-floor apartment without explanation. You blink. Then you blink again. The breeze carries it away before you can grab it. You tell yourself it's just a leftover from someone else's celebration. There must have been a wedding nearby. Probably. By noon, you're sitting across from Madame Wei again. You smell like sleep, she says, without looking up from the charcoal sketch she's shading. It's another spirit portrait. This one has no eyes yet. You ask about the red paper. She doesn't answer directly. They say if a ghost visits your dreams peacefully, it means the marriage was accepted. You almost smile. So I'm part of the family now? She snorts. Not unless you want to be, but you might be useful. Great. Ghost-in-law duties. Today's assignment is more delicate. Writing a ghost marriage proposal. Yes, she says, already pulling out blank paper and a thin brush. We write them too. Especially when a family suspects a restless spirit is asking for a partner. You raise your eyebrows. How would they know that? Oh, the usual, unexplained noises. Favorite flowers growing on graves. The occasional wedding veil showing up in an attic where it shouldn't be. She shrugs. Once, a goat refused to enter a family temple until they burned a paper dowry. Historians still argue whether these signs were actual beliefs or just folklore stitched into daily life. Either way, in many communities, they were treated with serious urgency. A restless spirit wasn't just a nuisance, it was a symptom of unfinished business. And marriage was a cure, even posthumously. You dip the brush into ink and hesitate. Do I address the letter to the spirit directly? Madame Wei nods. Begin like any proposal. Be formal, respectful, a touch poetic if you can manage. You sigh and begin. Honored soul, though the veil of life has passed between us, let this union be one of peace and completeness. You're not a poet, but the words come strangely easily. Maybe it's the incense. Or maybe it's the growing sense that these letters aren't just messages. They're ceremonies in ink, spells of closure, dignity, and unexpected warmth. You pause to ask, what if the spirit declines? She chuckles. Then we try again, sometimes with a better photograph. She's not joking. You help prepare the rest of the offerings. A miniature vanity, a hand mirror, silk shoes, and even a paper cell phone, fully equipped with hand-drawn emojis. The logic seems to be, why send someone into the afterlife underdressed or disconnected? It reminds you a little of those time capsules buried in elementary schools, except these ones are destined for fire, not dirt, and they're meant to be received, not discovered. Families are always surprised how much effort this takes, Madame Wei mutters as she folds a ceremonial robe for burning. They think ghosts just want flowers and apologies, but even the dead have standards. In a lull between preparations, she tells you the story of a ghost marriage gone wrong. A family once married their daughter to a soldier who died in 1942. They were told it was a match made in heaven, but a week later, their door began slamming open at midnight. Every night. Nothing else, just that slam. Her voice lowers. Until someone remembered the soldier had died in winter. They'd burned him a summer suit. You nod solemnly. Ghost climate sensitivity, got it. She glares. It's about respect. If you wouldn't wear flip-flops to a funeral, don't burn them for the dead. Noted. That night, after the letter is finished and the offerings are packed, you help her carry everything to a small clearing on the hill above the cemetery. It's quiet, save for a few birds who haven't yet figured out that dusk means silence. You set up the altar. Madame Wei lights a single candle and murmurs a chant you don't understand but feel anyway. You kneel once again as the items are lit, one by one. They curl and flake into nothing, leaving only a sense of something completed. The wind picks up just slightly, enough to make the trees rustle like silk dresses. You close your eyes. You think, maybe this is what peace feels like. Not certainty, not proof, just a gentle flame in the dark, carrying words where your hands cannot follow. You find yourself returning to the cemetery more often now, not always for ghost marriage rituals. Sometimes you just sit beneath the old camphor tree, sipping a thermos of barley tea while the local crows side-eye you from the headstones. You've stopped wondering if the odd paper shoes left on graves are litter or tribute. They're both. There's a rhythm to it, this quiet underworld etiquette. You step around incense sticks. You nod at the caretaker even when he doesn't nod back. And when the wind tugs at your sleeve at just the right moment, you pause. Because maybe, just maybe, someone is saying hello. One morning, Madame Wei presents you with a box. Inside is a collection of letters, yellowed and brittle, tied together with faded red thread. These were found behind a collapsed wall in the old temple, she explains. No one claimed them. Some are love letters. Some are not. You pull one out carefully. The characters are delicate, rushed in places. The ink has feathered into the paper like veins. At the top, a name, Lin Yue. No family name attached. No address. The letter is addressed to the groom I never met. It begins plainly. I was promised to you when I was 13. You died before I turned 16. They didn't tell me until a week after your funeral. You read the entire thing out loud, slowly. Madame Wei doesn't interrupt. I wore the red dress anyway. I stood beside the altar. They burned your photo beside my wedding slippers. I hope you liked them. There's no anger in the letter, no resentment. Just a curious tenderness that makes the air feel heavier than usual. I think she loved him, you murmur. Madame Wei shakes her head. Maybe. Or maybe she just didn't want to be left behind. That's the thing about ghost marriages. They're not always about romance. In fact, rarely so. Mainstream historians agree that most ghost weddings served social or spiritual needs, not passionate ones. In patriarchal households, an unmarried woman's spirit was considered problematic, unable to rest, unable to return to her ancestral shrine, unable to take her place in the family line. A ghost marriage fixed that. It gave her status, belonging. Quirkier details emerge in fringe accounts. Some regions had special matchmakers just for ghost weddings. These women, often widows or mediums, claimed they could sense the temperament of a spirit suitor by how the incense smoke moved or whether a nearby candle flickered when names were read aloud. And sometimes, as unlikely as it sounds, the living volunteered to marry the dead. You hear about one such man, a rice farmer named Sheng who lost his bride in a flood. 2 years later, he agreed to marry her ghost, going through a full wedding with paper attendants, ritual baths, and even a feast afterward. He lived alone for the rest of his life, leaving fresh joss sticks on her grave every month. Some called it devotion, Madame Wei says. Others called it delusion. But what matters is that no one ever questioned her place in the shrine again. You ask what happens to the letters after they're read, after the spirits are soothed. She taps the box. We burn them, always. They're not for us. You hesitate. But they're history. She arches an eyebrow. And history has teeth. Don't assume it wants to be remembered. Still, she lets you keep one. The Lin Yue letter. Just don't lose it, she says. If she asks, I'll deny everything. You smile, but tuck the letter carefully into a new envelope, as if it might flutter away on its own. That night, you dream again. This time, you're seated at a banquet table with no end. Lanterns sway above. A woman in a red veil sits across from you, silent. She lifts her glass filled not with wine, but ink. You toast. And when you wake up, there's rice in your pocket. You don't own rice. Historians still argue whether ghost marriage dreams were the product of stress, suggestion, or something far older. In many households, such dreams were taken as signs, not just of approval, but of gratitude. Families would even record them in household registers, alongside birth and death dates. Aunt Liu dreamed her nephew bowed to her from the afterlife. 3 bowls of congee appeared in the kitchen the next day. Uncle Ren saw a white horse in his sleep after marrying off his daughter's spirit. The family received an unexpected inheritance weeks later. You start to understand that in this world, dreams are more than dreams. They're the paperwork of the invisible. As you leave Madame Wei's shop, she hands you a folded square of red cloth. Keep this near your bed, just in case Yue visits again. You look down at it. What is it? A wedding napkin, she says. But don't worry, it's just symbolic. You glance at her. Everything is symbolic. She smiles. Exactly. The morning air is unusually still. You sit on the temple steps with a cup of lukewarm soy milk, watching a red dragonfly rest on your shoelace. Everything feels quiet in a way that suggests something is waiting to happen, but isn't quite ready. The napkin Madame Wei gave you is tucked under your pillow now. You haven't dared move it. You haven't dared inspect it too closely either. Just knowing it's there is enough to keep your sleep laced with odd warmth and occasional cryptic whispers. Today she meets you in front of a small village shrine, one you haven't seen before. It's nestled into the hillside, more overgrown than sacred. The door creaks open with a sound like someone clearing their throat after centuries of silence. We're cleaning, she says. You glance at the pile of brooms and buckets. Oh, you reply, a sacred spring cleaning. Something like that. As you sweep cobwebs from carved dragons and unstick faded offerings of dried plums, she begins telling you about the so-called correspondence archives. Boxes of ghost marriage letters kept in certain regional temples. These weren't burned right away, she explains, dusting off a deity statue. Some were kept until the family was sure the marriage worked. You ask how one can tell if a ghost marriage is working. She straightens, wiping her hands. No more nightmares. No more coughing children. No more strange cats howling outside windows, that sort of thing. Mainstream historians still argue whether this temple archive practice was widespread or just local legend. But the fact remains. Letters were powerful, and power often leads people to collect what should be let go. In some places, there were entire drawers labeled with family surnames. Others simply filed by date. Ink still faintly wet in the humidity. One temple near Luoyang reportedly had an unmatched souls drawer. A sad little collection of letters that had no response, no agreed match, no final ceremony. These were never burned. They were kept out of caution, out of pity. You pause your sweeping. Ghost rejection letters? You ask. Madame Wei nods. Sometimes the families of the living declined. Other times the spirit refused. You tilt your head. How would anyone know that? She shrugs. Same way we know most things in this line of work. Weird smells, blocked chimneys, chickens that stop laying eggs. Ah, the holy signs. You joke, she says, lifting a chipped incense burner. But there was once a monk who claimed to read spiritual compatibility by watching how pigeons landed on the temple roof. And did it work? No idea, she smirks, but he died surrounded by very well-matched pigeons. You both laugh quietly. As the shrine begins to look vaguely habitable, she pulls a bundle from her satchel, a thick roll of cloth tied with twine. Inside are letters. You recognize the style instantly. Careful brushstrokes, high-grade paper, and the ceremonial red ink reserved for formal ancestral communication. These, she says, were kept too long. Decades. You feel a strange pressure in your chest, like opening someone else's diary, like exhuming history not meant to be remembered. They were never burned? No, the matches fell through, families moved, floods, wars, bad omens. But these were all proposals, all offered, all unanswered. She hands you one. You unfold it slowly. To the daughter of the Li family, born in the year of the ox, may your spirit rest with honor. Though our son never drew breath, we believe your presence would give him shape in the beyond. We offer 12 robes, 3 hair combs, and a paper sedan chair. The letter continues with careful lists of gifts, prayers, and a poetic plea. Let him know the joy of marriage, though life denied him. You look up. They married her to a stillborn child. She nods. It's more common than you'd think. sometimes to bind wandering spirits, sometimes to ease grief, sometimes just so the family could imagine what might have been. A chill lingers at your neck despite the warm afternoon. This isn't a fairy tale. It's not about doomed love or romantic ghosts whispering through willow trees. It's bureaucracy. It's legacy. It's families doing paperwork with incense and ashes because they can't bear to imagine their kin wandering without a home, even in death. You ask, were there rules? Like, who could initiate a ghost marriage? Oh yes, she says, and many were broken. Generally, it was the responsibility of the older generation to arrange the match. Parents for a deceased son, uncles or grandmothers for unmarried daughters. But there are records, whispers really, of younger siblings initiating weddings for their elder dead, of widows arranging second marriages for ghosts, of entire villages pooling funds to marry off an unlucky spirit whose grave kept cracking. Some saw it as kindness, others insurance. There's a fringe account, which you're not sure is entirely apocryphal, about a man who tried to marry himself to a ghost bride, hoping to inherit her dowry, which the family had symbolically burned as part of the ceremony. They say the plan backfired. Madame Wei grins. He went bald overnight. You decide not to ask for sources on that one. But you do ask, what happens to the unmatched letters? She takes one last look at the bundle. We'll burn them tonight, quietly, just the two of us. That evening, under the newly cleaned shrine eaves, you light the flame together. The letters burn quickly, ink curling into smoke, names lifted gently into the darkening sky. No wind, no flickering, just stillness. And then, one pigeon lands softly on the rooftop. Madame Wei doesn't say a word, but she smiles. The next morning, the world seems oddly balanced. A rare quiet has settled over the market stalls, as though even the dumpling vendors are speaking softer than usual. You stroll through narrow lanes, your hand brushing against stucco walls faded with age and prayer. You think of the letters, how they vanished into flame, how their words are now ash scattered in the evening breeze, and you wonder, if a letter never reaches its reader, does the message still echo? You're halfway through a steamed bun when Madame Wei corners you outside the herbalist's shop. There's someone you need to meet, she says, tugging your sleeve like a mother dragging a child to temple. You swallow quickly. A living someone? She gives you a look. Let's not ruin the surprise. She leads you past the river, across a wobbly wooden bridge that creaks with each suspicious step. Beyond the water is a modest courtyard house surrounded by plum trees, none of them in bloom, though their bark seems to hum with waiting. A frail man answers the door. His eyes are sharp. His smile, limited to one side of his mouth, is lopsided in a way that suggests both humor and permanent skepticism. This is Uncle Zhao, Madame Wei says. He's the last paper-letter matchmaker in this province. Uncle Zhao waves you inside. His sitting room smells like dried ginger and inkstone dust. On every surface, folded spirit money, half-finished paper offerings, brushes soaking in cloudy water, and letters. So many letters. Stacks of them bound by string, arranged like sacred archives with no official seal. I keep the old ways, Zhao says with a shrug. Not many want them now, but when they do, they come to me. You glance at one letter. The handwriting is tight, crammed, desperate. This one? You ask. Ah, he says. That was a mother begging me to find her daughter a ghost husband. The daughter died in an accident. The family feared she would become a Gui Hun, a restless spirit. They sent me 3 letters. Only one came back with a match. Why not the others? He chuckles. The grooms were particular. You stare. The grooms, the ghost grooms. He nods. Some of them don't want to marry. Others have already found partners. You blink. Ghosts are dating? Zha waves it off. Not dating, But they have preferences, personality, family lineage, burial proximity, and some just want to be left alone. You suppress the urge to ask if ghosts are allowed to swipe left. Mainstream historians usually interpret this process more symbolically. The rituals reflect the desires of the living, not the dead. But fringe traditions, especially among older, more animist communities, treat the spirits as full individuals with agency, preferences, even grudges. Zhao pulls out a tiny red envelope sealed with wax. This, he says, is a rejection letter. You blink. Excuse me? From the spirit's family, the living ones. They claimed their son's spirit had become content on his own, that he did not wish to take another wife. Another? Zhao nods solemnly. He died in a boating accident with his betrothed. They were married posthumously together. Apparently, even in death, fidelity still counts for something. You sit back, overwhelmed by the tenderness of it all. These aren't just rituals. They're relationships, negotiations, bureaucracies conducted by moonlight and candle smoke. Zhao hands you a folded paper horse. For safe travel, he says. Travel where? He grins. Wherever these stories are taking you. Madame Wei appears in the doorway again. Time to go. Outside, the plum trees rustle in a breeze you don't feel. As you walk, she tells you about a particular kind of letter rarely discussed, even among insiders. The confession letter. These are not match requests, not pleas, not invitations. They are apologies. When a spirit is disturbed or angry, families sometimes write letters to admit wrongs, she says. Not to make things right, just to show they remember. You ask what wrongs need confessing. Oh, she says, all the usual, broken promises, ignored tombs, rushed funerals. One woman apologized for replacing her brother's photo on the altar with a more flattering one. She thought it would help him look better in the afterlife. He didn't appreciate it. You laugh. Ghost vanity? She shrugs. Even the dead care about their image. Historians still argue whether confession letters were more than psychological closure. Some see them as therapeutic rituals for the living. Others view them as part of a larger karmic economy. Appease, acknowledge, respect, and avoid misfortune. You wonder aloud what would happen if someone wrote a confession letter to the wrong spirit. Oh, she says, smiling faintly. That's why we triple-check the names. That evening, you try writing your own letter. Not to any spirit in particular, just to the idea of them. You borrow one of Madame Wei's blank joss papers. The texture is rough but receptive, like old skin. To whoever is listening, you write. I don't know if this reaches you, but I've seen your footprints in the rituals, your shadows in the ink. I hope you find rest. I hope someone lit a lantern for you. Then, feeling absurd, you fold the paper into thirds and place it beneath your teacup. It's not burned. Not yet. But you sleep deeper that night. And when you wake, there's a single plum blossom on your windowsill. Out of season. Out of place. Exactly where it needs to be. You wake the next morning to the smell of dried chrysanthemum and warm rice porridge. Madame Wei's guest room is still dim, the paper windows gently filtering the morning sun into a soft cream glow. You feel rested, but there's a tug in your chest, a lingering thread of thought, unfinished. You sit at the low table, porridge steaming before you. A folded slip of red paper rests next to the bowl. It's not yours, not the letter you wrote last night. This one is new. 3 words in careful brushstroke. You are invited. You glance around. The room is empty. Madame Wei is nowhere to be found. You unfold the note further. Ancestral feast. Midnight. By the old well. Bring silence. You sigh. Bring silence sounds like the most suspicious dinner invitation you've ever received. And yet, of course, you go. All day, Madame Wei doesn't mention it. She chatters on about tofu prices and paper folding techniques, completely ignoring the mysterious appearance of ghost stationery on your breakfast tray. Either she's testing you, or she's not in charge this time. That night, you make your way out of the house with as much grace as possible, which is to say, you trip over a cat near the door and whisper swear into your sleeve. You follow the moonlit path down past the old grave mounds, across the bridge with its familiar groan, and stop where the paper instructed. Beside the village's oldest well, now covered with moss and a lid of wood older than logic. No one's there. You wait. And just when you're about to chalk the whole thing up to sleep-deprived hallucination, you hear them. Footsteps, soft and uncertain. They're not loud. They're not theatrical, just real. People emerge from the dark. Not ghosts, at least not obviously. Villagers, elderly ones. A few teenagers in temple whites. Even Uncle Zhao, carrying what looks like a small bundle of incense in his mouth like a cigar. They nod at you, acknowledging your presence without ceremony. A cloth is spread out on the ground. Dishes appear, some real, some made of paper. Fish, dumplings, red bean pastries. Whole chickens rendered in delicate ink and folded into three-dimensional shape. You spot tiny scrolls tucked inside paper lotus roots. And then they begin placing letters. Not reading them, not writing them, placing them, each one folded, sealed, and quiet. It's an offering ceremony, but not to the gods. This is to ancestors, to the unmarried dead, to the ones who were never welcome to a household table in life, and are now invited in spirit. You whisper to Madame Wei, who's appeared silently beside you. Is this legal? She arches an eyebrow. Is what legal? This midnight ghost potluck. She shrugs. There's no law against remembering. One of the elders begins chanting softly. Not a prayer, more like a poem. Something about water and roots, light and footsteps. The words are old, and your Mandarin isn't quite up to the dialect. Then you realize they're reading the names. One by one, a girl who died in childhood. A soldier who never returned. A midwife who never married. A boy drowned before his naming day. None of them had partners in life. But here, tonight, they are invited. The lonely dead, Madame Wei says, that's what we call them. Historians still debate how widespread this custom was, and whether these rituals were true marriage ceremonies or symbolic meals. Some anthropologists insist it's a confusion with Qingming rites or mourning feasts. But in these valleys, among these people, the feast is something else entirely. A matchmaking of remembrance. You watch as incense sticks are lit, letters placed into the small ceremonial burner in the center. The smoke rises slowly, curling into the air like fingers beckoning someone home. A teen girl beside you places down a folded red envelope and whispers, "To the aunt I never met, I hope you find someone." You feel your throat tighten. You glance at Madame Wei. Do you have anyone you write to? She doesn't answer at first, just picks at a corner of a paper turnip. I had a sister, she says softly. She died before I was born. Sometimes I feel like I remember her, even though I can't. I write to her on New Year's. New. And does she write back? Sometimes, she says, with that half smile you can never read, usually to scold me. The fire has burned low now. The food, real and paper, is left untouched. You think about how strange it is to prepare an entire meal that no one eats. And yet, in that moment, it feels fuller than any banquet you've attended. Someone plays a soft note on a bamboo flute. Others begin humming, low and breathy, like wind in a cave. You're not scared. That's the most surprising part. You're not scared at all. Because here, in this strange, quiet gathering, the dead aren't unwelcome. They aren't angry. They aren't haunting. They're invited. They are part of the story. You feel something warm near your hand. You glance down. someone's placed a small folded letter next to you. It reads only, "Now you are part of this." You look up, startled, but everyone is still quietly singing. Madame Wei has vanished again, or maybe you never saw her leave. The fire is fading, the names have all been read, the letters burned, the paper dumplings gently wilted by the night air. You don't remember walking home, you just remember dreaming of letters that fold themselves, and spirits that smile in gratitude. The morning arrives with a golden hush. You lie in bed, still clothed from the night before, and watch the dust drift lazily through beams of slanted sunlight. There's something about yesterday's midnight gathering that clings to you. Not frightening, not even fully mysterious, just a quiet, lingering presence, like the scent of incense in your sleeve. Your letter from the feast is still on the table. Now you are part of this. You reread it again and again, hoping the paper will tell you more. It doesn't, but your heart does. And it says, "Go back to the well." So, after breakfast and a half-hearted attempt at sweeping Madame Wei's porch, you find your way down the familiar path, past the sleeping chickens and gossiping laundry lines, until the old well rises in view once again. This time, in daylight, it looks normal, too normal, as if the whole thing were just a dream cleverly constructed by a full moon and an overactive imagination. But then you see the traces. A small patch of scorched grass where the burner had stood, a crumpled piece of silver joss paper lodged under a rock, and a single letter, sealed but singed, lodged in a crack between two stones. You look around. No one is watching. You pull it out. It's addressed to no one, or maybe to everyone. Its content, only a single line. "Find the girl in the red robe who never married." You sit down hard on a flat stone. Of all the cryptic clues in the world, this feels like the most cinematic. But instead of a secret map or treasure hunt, you're being asked to follow a rumor from the dead. You take the letter back to Madame Wei. Her face, for once, goes serious. "I think I know who that is," she says. "But you're not going to like it." You blink. "Ghost bride drama?" She sighs. "More like imperial scandal meets small village folklore." She brews tea slowly while she tells the story, as if each fact needs time to steep. About 200 years ago, during the Qing dynasty, there was a governor's daughter here. Pretty, clever, educated, unusual for her time. She wore red a lot, even when she wasn't supposed to. They say it was a protest, or maybe just fashion. You smile. "Red is for weddings." "Exactly," Madame Wei says, "and she never had one. Refused every match her father arranged. Said none of them could match her spirit. One day, she vanished. No note, no body, just gone. Some said she ran off to become a nun. Others claimed she drowned herself. But the old families here, they say her spirit still lingers." In red, she nods. "People leave letters near the oldest grave behind the temple. That's where the story says she was secretly buried, unwed and ashamed." You ask, why ashamed? Madame Wei shrugs. "Because even powerful daughters weren't allowed to choose silence over ceremony." The mainstream records mention nothing about this girl, of course. She's absent from every scroll and genealogy list you check. But one village almanac, written in fading ink by a retired magistrate, includes a curious footnote about a young woman of crimson defiance. Historians still argue, Madame Wei adds, whether she ever existed, but the letters haven't stopped. People still write to her, asking for advice or forgiveness, or matches for their own restless daughters. The idea feels absurd and gentle at the same time. You decide to visit her. That evening, you make your way up the temple hill. The monks have all retired. The lanterns along the path flicker dimly, and the wind has taken on that peculiar coolness that only comes in the hour between dog barks and cricket songs. Behind the temple, the earth slopes downward into a tiny glade. There, half swallowed by ivy, is a headstone. No name, no inscription, just a carving of two plum blossoms, entangled. You place your hand on the stone. The air around it hums slightly, like the vibration of a tuning fork. You kneel, and because it seems right, you speak aloud. I was told you never married, that you wore red, that you disappeared. Is it true? The wind answers with a soft swirl of leaves. You don't expect anything to happen, but you leave a note anyway, folded, unsigned. If you're still waiting, I hope you're not lonely. I hope you chose silence, not shame. And if you need someone to tell your story, I'm listening. You tuck it beside the stone, and as you turn to go, something catches your eye. At the edge of the path, half hidden under a fern, is a scrap of red fabric. You pick it up carefully. It's old. The weave is fine. It smells faintly of sandalwood and ash. No one's been buried here for generations. And yet, the fabric is warm. You carry it back with you, unsure whether it belongs in a museum or under your pillow. That night, you sleep with it pressed between 2 pages of your notebook, and your dreams are full of half-written vows, red threads and wedding flutes played by invisible mouths. You wake just before dawn, as if someone whispered your name. Outside, the sky is a pale blur, not yet gold, not quite gray. The village hasn't stirred yet. Even the roosters are on snooze. But you're already sitting up, the pages of your notebook still cracked open beside you. The scrap of red fabric pressed between them like a secret talisman. You touch it gently. It's cool now. No more warmth. No dream lingering on your tongue. But the memory of the girl in red, that mystery, that aching question, remains. After a hasty breakfast of salted egg and pickled radish, you make your way into the village archives. Or rather, the room that pretends to be one. It's more broom closet than library, guarded by an elderly man with impossibly long eyebrows and a fondness for boiled sweets. He lets you in with a grunt and a shrug, warning you not to sneeze near the Qing scrolls. You spend hours cross-legged on the floor, flipping through record books, temple notes, family genealogies. You find matchmaker logs from 1824, rice tax records from 1831, a surprisingly detailed inventory of umbrellas lost in a festival parade, and finally, in the corner of a water-stained booklet, a curious listing. One red-robed woman, unmarried, name unknown, known for reciting poems to plum blossoms, believed drowned or departed, no match ever completed, no rites performed. No rites. That's important. In ghost marriage tradition, the ritual isn't just about companionship, it's about completeness. To die unmarried, especially for a woman, was once thought to leave a soul wandering, a shade without direction. The rites, marriage, burial, memorial, were steps toward rest. Without them, people feared a spirit might linger, unsettled. You start seeing her everywhere, in stories told by aunties peeling garlic on their stoops, in the way red ribbons are tied carefully around infant wrists, warding off spirits who wish to steal daughters for weddings, in a chipped teacup with a painted blossom, locked in a temple cabinet and labeled for the sister who left, a woman who never married and yet is spoken of as if still waiting. You ask Madame Wei, would she even want to be found? She sets down her embroidery. Want has nothing to do with it. People write to her because they think she still listens, and because they need someone to listen back. That night, your thoughts drift toward all the women history forgets. Not queens or poets, but ordinary daughters who vanish from records the moment they refuse to marry. The way their names are spoken only in kitchens, in rumors, in letters that burn before anyone can answer them. Historians still argue whether these traditions were empowering or oppressive, whether ghost marriages were a way to honor the dead, or bind them to patriarchal expectations, even in death. The truth, you realize, might be both, or neither. Because here's what no scroll tells you. Sometimes the families who perform these rites aren't just checking a cultural box. Sometimes they're grieving. Sometimes they're trying to apologize across generations. And sometimes they're just trying to make sure no one eats dinner alone in the afterlife. That's the soft underbelly of it all, the sweetness beneath the superstition. You begin to wonder how many letters have been written, not just to the dead, but for them. How many of these notes, folded in careful silence, are acts of hope, of connection, of saying, "I see you," even if no one else did. One afternoon, a small boy approaches you near the tea shop. He's maybe 10, shy, cheeks sticky with candied hawthorn. "Are you the ghost letter person?" he asks. You blink. "I guess I am." He nods solemnly, then hands you a piece of paper. Not folded, not sealed, just scrawled in pencil. "Dear Ghost Lady, my aunt says you got left out. That's not nice. You can have my hamster. He died, but he was very soft and good. I think you two would like each other. Love, Wei Ming." You fold the paper with shaking hands. It is the most earnest matchmaking you've ever seen. That night, you visit the headstone again, this time with Wei Ming's letter. You place it beside the plum blossoms and say softly, "He's not a great writer yet, but he has good taste." You almost expect the wind to giggle. Instead, it stays still. You leave the red fabric there too, just in case she wants it back. As you walk home, a thought comes, uninvited but warm. Maybe the girl in red isn't waiting for a husband. Maybe she's waiting for someone to tell her story properly. Not as a ghost, not as a cautionary tale, but as someone who chose her own silence and was brave enough to stay with it. And now maybe that person is you. The next morning greets you with birdsong and the aroma of steamed buns drifting up from a street vendor's cart. You stretch, feeling the pleasant stiffness of a night well slept, and realize, with a little jolt, that you've been here longer than you planned. A week, maybe more. You'd promised yourself this was just a side trip, a curious detour. But curiosity has turned into ritual. You eat the same breakfast from the same cart. The old vendor now waves before you even speak. You check the temple path daily, sometimes twice. No new letters, no new fabric scraps, just silence that feels less lonely than it did before. In town, the buzz has shifted. People whisper about you, but not unkindly. Someone has nicknamed you Letter Seeker. Madame Wei says this with a proud smile, as if you've passed some secret rite of passage. One afternoon, while flipping through more brittle almanacs and red thread-bound books in the dusty archives, you stumble across a curious volume. It's mislabeled, crammed behind a broken fan and a stack of ink brushes chewed by rats. Inside, letters, hundreds of them. Some yellowed with time, others newer, edges still crisp. Some written in elegant brush script, others scrawled in pencil, crayon, even typed, all addressed to someone unnamed, all signed with initials or, occasionally, full names followed by, "With respect, please forgive me," or "May you find your groom." And in the back, pinned like a reluctant butterfly, is a ledger. It lists date, letter type, recipient, offering, result, if known. You scan the entries. Many are marked unknown. Some note simple outcomes. Dream of reunion. Pregnancy after 3 years of trying. Calm after months of illness. Superstition? Coincidence? Perhaps. But here it is, in ink and paper, preserved by someone who took it all seriously. And one line, dated just 3 months ago, reads, "Girl in red, joss papers, silver mirror, dream of flames, name heard." You pause. A dream of flames. You remember your own dreams. The smell of burning, the red silk warm in your hand, the way the headstone seemed to hum beneath your touch. Maybe it's all your imagination, maybe. But that word, name, jumps out, because so far she hasn't had one. Not officially. Not in any scroll, ledger, or whispered tale. You ask Madame Wei, and she purses her lips. "Well," she says slowly, "some call her Mei Lian." You raise an eyebrow. It means beautiful lotus. A name mothers used to whisper when they told their daughters stories about bravery disguised as disobedience. Not a real name, probably, just a kindness. But even a kindness can become a truth, if enough people believe in it. You visit the headstone again. It feels wrong now that it's nameless, like a book with no title. So you bring a small offering, a paper lotus, folded by hand, your clumsy creases hidden beneath red ink that reads, Mei Lian. You set it gently at the base of the stone. Whisper her name once, and the wind picks up, not fierce, not cold, just a sudden breeze that feels like breath. Historians still argue whether these names, the ones given after death, by rumor or reverence, hold any weight. Whether they rewrite history or simply decorate it. But in this moment, kneeling on moss and time, you decide names matter. Not for record keeping, for remembrance. From then on, you write to her regularly, not long letters, just fragments. Today, the fishmonger's wife gave birth to twins. Everyone says it's because she left you peaches last month. I tried red bean cakes at the festival. Too sweet, but I liked the color. I think your silence was brave. I hope they told you that. Sometimes you leave the notes under a rock. Sometimes you burn them and watch the smoke drift toward the hills. And once, on a day when the sky seems particularly heavy, you ask her the thing that's been nibbling at the corners of your mind. Were you ever lonely? No answer. But that night you dream of someone humming, soft and steady, and the melody follows you into morning. Word gets around. Others begin leaving their own notes. Tiny scraps tucked near the grave. Red thread bracelets. Even an old woman's wedding comb wrapped in silk. One child leaves a drawing of a red-robed princess riding a dragon. Madame Wei chuckles when she sees it. She's getting fan mail now. You grin. About time. What started as folklore begins to bloom into something else. A quiet community, held together by stories and scraps. People who were once too shy to speak of the past now swap tales at the market, asking, "Have you written to her lately?" as easily as they ask about the weather. And always, there is the undercurrent. We remember her, we name her, we honor her silence. Not as shame, but as choice. It begins to rain. Not the grand cinematic rain you might expect when something meaningful happens, but a gentle, sideways drizzle, barely enough to soak your shoulders. The kind of rain that makes everything smell like damp wood and old stories. You walk slowly through the village, your shoes squelching in the clay. There's a small umbrella hooked over your wrist, but you don't bother with it. The rain feels like it belongs, like part of a ritual you didn't realize you were performing. You're on your way to the temple again, not for research this time, not even for a visit. You've been invited by the monks. They've heard, of course. Everyone has. The stranger who writes letters to the dead girl. The red scraps. The offerings. The strange coincidence that since your arrival, no family in town has reported any ghost sickness. No one has needed an emergency ghost marriage, and fewer nightmares have been whispered about by children with sweaty palms. Superstition? Maybe. Or maybe something larger is at work, something old and gracious and full of quiet rules. The head monk, a man with a face like carved driftwood and eyes that miss nothing, ushers you into a back room. The air is warm, the scent of sandalwood thick enough to chew. "We'd like to show you something," he says. You nod, grateful and damp. He brings out a scroll. It's old, the paper fragile, the ink faded, but the brush strokes still precise. And there, painted delicately in cinnabar and gold, is a woman in a red robe. She sits at a low table, head tilted slightly, hands poised, as if mid-letter. No name written beneath her, just a single character. Jing, Jing. Silence. You breathe it in. "That's her?" you ask. The monk shrugs. Some say yes. Others say she's every unmarried soul who waited too long to speak. Historians still argue whether these temple paintings were meant to represent real people or were symbolic, amalgamated spirits meant to embody cultural anxieties or moral lessons. But looking at her, at the sharpness of her cheekbones, the way her gaze pierces across time, you're fairly certain this was someone. You ask if the scroll has ever been displayed. "Once," he replies, "but she drew too much attention. People came not to pray, but to stare." He smiles, and for the first time you see that even monks can be mischievous. Now she prefers quiet. Later you're given access to a series of ritual documents, fragile guides used in ghost marriages, copied meticulously over the decades. One passage jumps out. "If no family remains to speak for the soul, the village may speak. If no voice remains, a letter may be written. If no name remains, one may be given, gently, with sincerity." This is not forgery, it is forgiveness. You write it down. In your notebook, between the pressed petals and the bits of joss paper that you keep like bookmarks, you begin your own letter. Not to her, this time, to yourself. You thought you came here for answers. Instead, you found echoes, fragments. A trail of silence leading not to fear, but to something tender. You've learned that grief doesn't always scream. Sometimes it writes politely in red ink and waits to be found. You pause. Look out the temple window. The rain has stopped, and you remember a story Madame Wei told you just days ago, about a woman from her own childhood, an aunt, maybe, or just a neighbor, who refused every suitor brought to her door. A woman who laughed like bells and sang into jars, so her voice would stay caught inside. She died unmarried, of course, and for decades people whispered that her spirit still hovered at the river bend, braiding ghost flowers into children's hair. And what happened to her, you had asked? Madame Wei just smiled. She became a story. That afternoon you returned to the grave, not just to leave something, but to listen. You sit in the damp grass for hours, back against the stone, eyes half closed, notebook in your lap. A dog barks in the distance. Somewhere, dumplings are being steamed. A child is crying, not from pain, but because someone gave her the wrong color candy. And above it all, the stillness. Not silence, stillness. The kind of hush that fills a room before music starts. The kind that hums just behind the breeze. You imagine her sitting beside you, Mei Lian, red robe damp at the hem, hair pinned loosely, fingers tracing invisible lines in the dirt. You don't speak, neither does she. But you both know this. There's power in being remembered, in being named, in having a story, even if no one knows how it ends. Especially then. When you rise, the headstone seems a little less cold, a little more like home. You wake the next day to the sound of bells. Soft, temple bells. Not the panicked clang of alarm clocks or school chimes. These are old bells, metal rubbed smooth by centuries of hands, wind, and memory. You pull on your coat and step outside, unsure why you feel drawn. The bells aren't unusual here, but today they seem specific. They're not summoning the faithful, they're calling you. And you answer, The town is quieter than usual. No vendors shouting, no scooters sputtering by. Just that steady tone of bells from the hilltop temple, echoing through mist like a memory being retold. You climb slowly, breath fogging, steps soft in the mud. It's a path you've walked many times now. Your feet know where the stones shift. At the top, a small crowd is gathered, facing the altar. They part to let you through, and the monk from before gives you a nod that feels strangely formal. He gestures toward a lacquered box, dark red and gleaming. Inside is a wedding letter, but not a new one. This is old, decades, maybe a century old, carefully preserved on silk paper, the brushwork faded but legible. The letter is addressed not to a groom or a bride, but to the unnamed girl who waits beneath the cedar tree. The monks found it tucked behind a cracked panel in the temple wall, probably forgotten after a ritual, or deliberately hidden. It's hers, the monk says. You know which her he means. You read the letter aloud, voice slow and careful. May your waiting be honored. May your silence be heard. May those who live speak kindly of you. And may your name never be dust. This letter is not marriage. It is memory. The group is quiet. Someone sniffs. A child squeezes their grandmother's hand. Historians still argue whether letters like this were formal parts of ghost marriage rituals or personal acts of mourning. Some believe they were meant to anchor spirits in peace. Others think they were written out of guilt. Emotional confessions dressed in calligraphy. But standing there, letter in hand, you feel none of that academic detachment. You feel the pulse of something older, kinder. A language that doesn't demand proof or footnotes. Just presence. After the ritual, as the crowd disperses, Madame Wei catches up with you, her cane clicking lightly on the stones. She's part of the town now, she says. She always was, you reply. She smiles. That evening, the sky turns gold. Clouds stretch like pulled sugar across the horizon. You sit outside your rented room with a cup of tea and a pile of envelopes. You've decided to write back to everyone who's written to you about Mei Lian. Some of them just left notes near her grave. Others slipped messages into your hands at the market. A few, braver ones, told you their own stories of unmarried aunts, sisters, mothers who never spoke their hearts. You write carefully. Thank you for remembering her. Thank you for sharing your story. You are part of her now. You start to realize that ghost marriages were never really about the dead, or at least not just. They were about the living, about what we do with silence, with gaps in stories, about how we reach across time, across fear, to stitch dignity back into lives that were cut short or boxed in. Some of the letters you answer ask hard questions. Was she forced to stay silent? Was her death really just a fever? Do ghost marriages hurt or help? You answer honestly. You don't know, but you do know that Mei Lian, once unnamed, now has a voice. Dozens of voices, in fact, yours included. You remember a phrase from a book you found early in your research. To honor the dead, we must refuse to forget them, even when forgetting is easier. You think about how much forgetting has happened already, not just of Mei Lian, but of all the others. The nameless brides, the unmarried men who were ghost married into families they never met, the matchmakers who wrote letters with trembling hands and hoped it would be enough to soothe restless spirits, the parents who lit incense and whispered apologies they could never say in life, and the letters, oh, the letters, folded like prayers, burned like offerings, tucked into cracks and boxes and temple walls. You wonder how many are still out there, waiting to be found. That night, you fall asleep quickly, but not deeply. Your dreams are layered. First, you walk through the temple, barefoot, the floor cold and smooth. Then, you're writing with a brush made of cloud and ink that smells like plum wine. Then, you're laughing. not alone, but with someone whose face you never quite see. She's wearing red, of course, always red. When you wake, you still feel her there, not watching, just near. And instead of fear, there's only stillness. You whisper, "Good morning, Mei Lian," to the rising sun. And in the birdsong that answers, you think you hear her hum. You've stayed longer than planned. The ticket back home sits unused in your suitcase. The departure date quietly crossed out in pencil, then ink, then finally ignored altogether. No one's pressing you to leave. The townspeople have grown used to your presence, like the overgrown moss on the temple steps. Quiet, strange, but oddly comforting. You've begun keeping a ritual of your own. Each morning, just after sunrise, you walk past the incense vendors and tea stalls, bow slightly at the cedar tree where Mei Lian was buried, and place a folded letter near the roots. Nothing grand, just small notes, fragments, sometimes a question, sometimes a compliment. Once, embarrassingly, a drawing of a dumpling with a smiley face. And each morning, without fail, the letter is gone. No footprints, no rustling, just gone. You ask the temple monks if they were removing them, and they only smiled in that infuriatingly serene way that monks do when they definitely know something but won't say. "It's not for us to interrupt correspondence," one said. You're not sure whether it's superstition, animal mischief, or something stranger. But honestly, you don't care. The ritual soothes you. It grounds your days. Meanwhile, the town continues its gentle rhythm. You're invited to a wedding. Not a ghost one, but a real, breathing, tear-dabbing, noodle-serving wedding of two young shopkeepers. It's held in a courtyard strung with red lanterns. The bride's face veiled in silk. You sit in the back, sipping warm plum wine, and watching as the families bow, exchange greetings, and make offerings to their ancestors. And then, unexpectedly, they call your name. You freeze, smile awkwardly, wave, unsure if this is a speech moment or a take a picture one. But it's neither. They simply want you to light the incense for the unmarried ancestors, to speak their names. Some of the names are barely remembered. Some are just nicknames. One is simply third daughter. You speak them aloud, and in that moment, you feel it again. That hush, that electric stillness, like the air waiting for meaning. Historians still argue whether these ancestral offerings have measurable cultural effects, or if they're purely emotional, social rituals that preserve group identity. But you've seen too much now to treat it clinically. You've stood in the silence after names were spoken. You've felt the atmosphere shift when a forgotten person was remembered. Later, during the feast, an old man tells you a story about his great-aunt. She died unmarried at 27, which in their village was practically scandalous. Rather than ghost marry her, the family pretended she had eloped to Shanghai and invented letters from a fictitious husband who worked in shipping. They even forged return addresses. Why, you ask? He grins. Because no one wanted her to be pitied. She loved perfume, books, and lying about her age. We thought she'd appreciate the drama. You laugh. You can't help it. And when he raises a glass of rice wine to toast all the fabulous ghost brides, the entire table joins in. It's absurd. It's sweet. It's the human thing, really, this impulse to dignify our dead, to cover sorrow in laughter, to tell stories because they're all we have to fight forgetting. That night, instead of writing your usual letter under the cedar tree, you place a photo. A group picture from the wedding. You, red-faced from wine. The old man. The bride and groom. A half-eaten dumpling in the corner. You tuck it under the roots and whisper, "You would have loved this one." Then you pause. Or maybe hated it. Who knows? You can't win with wedding seating charts. You smile and walk away. Back in your room, you try to journal, but your pen hovers uncertainly. There's nothing new to say tonight. Or maybe there's too much. You glance at the bundle of documents you've collected. Copies of temple scrolls, translated ghost letters, annotated maps of grave sites, even the odd lipstick-stained envelope someone once tried to burn in offering. You think of putting it all into a book someday. But then again, maybe not. Maybe it's meant to stay scattered, like ashes, like memories. You close your eyes. The scent of sandalwood still clings to your sleeves. The breeze shifts through the window. And just before sleep takes you, you imagine her sitting by the cedar tree, flipping through the group photo, nodding approvingly. Or maybe rolling her eyes. You hope she's laughing. You dream of paper that night. It flutters down around you like snow, thick, warm snow, each sheet delicate and whispering. Ghost letters, thousands of them. Some burned, some buried, some simply forgotten between rafters and rice bins. And as they fall, you reach for them, hoping to catch just one. You wake up grasping air. Morning comes with the sound of sweeping. Outside, the temple caretakers are brushing fallen leaves from the courtyard. You sit by the window and watch them move in long, slow arcs. Their rhythm is almost meditative, like painting or calligraphy. It calms you, more than coffee ever could. After breakfast, 2 steamed buns and sweet ginger tea, you return to the temple, notebook in hand. You've been granted access to a private archive, more of a dusty back room, really, where stacks of untranscribed documents are stored. The room smells like time, ink, mildew, and camphor. You begin sorting, not really knowing what you'll find. Most of the papers are mundane, old ledgers, temple donations, weather logs, but every now and then something sparkles. A letter signed only with a thumbprint. A family registry with a name crossed out and replaced in red ink. A marriage document bearing 2 women's names. You pause at that one. Historians still argue whether same-sex ghost marriages existed in Qing and Republican-era China, or whether such records are misinterpretations. Some say they were cover stories for social ties too strong to break. Others believe they were coded protests, disguised in ritual language. Whatever the truth, this paper in your hand feels heavy, personal. You tuck it gently into a folder labeled delicate, which, honestly, could describe half the archive. The rest of your afternoon is spent puzzling over handwriting. Ink that's bled into rice paper, characters that loop like dancers one moment and snarl like thorns the next. You get a paper cut and feel oddly honored. At one point, you find an envelope that smells faintly of roses. Inside is a poem, unsigned. I was not born to be a bride, but still I wore the red, not for man or mother's pride, but to love the words I said. You read it twice, then 3 times. It's not a ghost letter in the strict sense, but it's adjacent. It echoes. And in that echo, you feel something shift. Maybe these rituals, these marriages of ink and ash, aren't just about binding the dead to some idea of peace. Maybe they're also about allowing the living to say what couldn't be said in life. What was too dangerous? Too unladylike, too late. Outside, the sun is beginning to dip. Long shadows stretch across the courtyard like arms reaching back in time. You pack up your notes and bow slightly as you leave the archive. It's silly, maybe, to bow to a room, but you've come to believe that places remember too. As you step outside, a familiar figure waits by the cedar tree. It's the old monk, the one who first explained ghost marriage to you with that perfect mix of patience and slyness. He hands you a folded square of paper, plain and thick. "This came today," he says. "No one knows who left it." You open it. It's a simple note. She visits the dreams of those who carry her name kindly. She does not forget. No signature, no date, just that. You look up at the monk. He only shrugs. "Many stories arrive without authors," he says. "That doesn't make them less true." You walk together in silence for a moment, the gravel crunching beneath your feet. "She's not done, is she?" you ask. "No one truly is," he replies. "Not as long as they're spoken of." That night you sit at your desk and write a letter. Not to Mei Lian, not to the past, but to yourself. You write, "You came here chasing a ghost story. You found something more. A ritual of remembering. A chorus of letters written in fire, buried in roots, carried in hands like water. You are part of it now. Speak kindly. Keep listening." You don't burn the letter. You tuck it into the inside flap of your journal. Let it wait. Like all good stories, your days stretch out like silk. The urgency that once burned behind your research, the need to explain, to dissect, to publish, has softened. You're still documenting, still piecing together fragments of China's ghost marriage customs. But now it's more like quilting than excavation. Stitch by stitch, quiet and steady. You learn the rhythm of the town, the rooster's cry that always comes 7 minutes too early, the temple bell that lingers a beat longer on humid days, the street vendor who sings off-key as he steams his taro buns. You begin to teach English to a few local kids in exchange for calligraphy lessons. The barter feels ancient and fair. In one lesson, your student Lin draws the character for spirit, Gui, and asks, "Is this the same as ghost in English?" You pause. "Well," you say slowly, "yes and no." You explain that in English, ghost usually means something spooky or dead. But in Chinese, gui can mean more. Ancestral presence, wandering soul, or just a respectful nod to someone not entirely gone. Lin frowns. "So, it's like visiting Grandma's grave, even if she's not there?" "Exactly." He nods sagely, and then draws a little hat on the ghost character. "Now it's happy." You laugh. That night, you visit the town's oldest graveyard. A quiet knoll lined with weather-worn stone markers and flickering red candles. Locals have told you this is where many ghost marriages were finalized in secret. It's not an official temple ground, just a memory space, a liminal patch of earth. You walk between the graves with slow steps, flashlight dimmed. At one of the older stones, you see a bundle of offerings, incense, folded paper coins, and a tiny mirror. A mirror? You lean in. According to some oral accounts, mirrors are left for spirits who might forget their own face, or for those whose reflection was never accepted in life. Historians still debate the origin of this mirror ritual. Some link it to Confucian aesthetics, others to Taoist beliefs about spirit doubles. And some say it's just a local habit, born of grief and creative superstition. You reach into your pocket, not sure why, and find a travel mirror of your own. It's chipped, smudged. You place it gently beside the offering, not out of pity, but because it feels right. Because if you'd lived a century ago in a place where love had to hide in rituals, you might have appreciated a mirror too. As you stand to leave, you hear something. A whisper? No, wind. But it curves strangely through the trees, lifting leaves in patterns that feel almost like handwriting. Back at your inn, the owner has left you a gift, a hand-copied set of folk tales about wandering brides, ghost feasts, and one story where a scholar marries the spirit of a woman who drowned and then wakes to find he's become a river reed. You sit up late reading by candlelight. One tale catches your attention. It's about a village girl who writes poems to her dead betrothed every full moon, binding each one with red thread and hiding them inside bamboo stalks. One day she disappears. Years later, during a drought, the villagers split open the bamboo to make buckets, and dozens of letters fall out. The stream rises that night, and it hasn't dried since. You close the book with a sigh. You'll write your own version someday. But not yet. There's a time for documenting and a time for dwelling. You're still dwelling. That evening, as you sip osmanthus tea on the porch, a local woman you've barely spoken to sits beside you. She's quiet for a long while. Then she says, "My grandmother was ghost married. I've never told anyone." You wait. She died in a fire, unmarried. They said her spirit was restless, so they married her to a boy who died from fever the same week. Strangers in life, but together in the afterworld. You nod. Did it bring peace? She shrugs. I don't know, but every time we visit her grave, someone leaves a pair of chopsticks. You don't ask who. You just imagine it. 2 chopsticks, side by side, resting on a stone. The quietest marriage certificate in the world. As the stars emerge, you both sit in silence. You no longer chase answers. Now you listen for echoes. The next morning, it rains. Not the polite mist you've grown used to, but a true summer downpour. It drapes the town in a sheer curtain of water. And for the first time in weeks, the streets feel hushed, emptied, paused. You stay indoors, perched beside the open window with a mug of warm soy milk. Rain spatters against the stone courtyard, puddling in corners, washing dust from lanterns and roof tiles. You watch it the way one might watch a film, entranced by every small change. From somewhere down the hall, the innkeeper's radio hums a warbly old love song. You can't quite catch the lyrics, but the melody feels oddly in tune with today. You pull out your journal and begin to write. But it's not notes or analysis. It's a letter to May Lane. You don't question the impulse. It just feels natural, like she's become a part of your days, woven into your meals, your conversations, the quiet clicks of your pen against paper. You write, "Dear May Leon, I hope the afterlife is less bureaucratic than this archive. I hope you found someone who can make you laugh at funerals." And on you go, telling her about your latest discoveries, the way the monk sneezes like a goose, the ghost marriage registry that accidentally listed a pet parrot once. The marriage was annulled. Eventually, it becomes a ritual. Each day you add to the letter, sometimes a paragraph, sometimes just a sentence. Historians still debate the role of personal writing in ritual practice. Were letters like these meant for spirits, or were they simply a balm for the living, a way to shape grief into something carryable? You don't know, but it helps. One day, you fold the letter and carry it to the riverbank where villagers burn joss paper and offerings. You don't burn it, though. You place it in a hollow of a tree, one you've passed dozens of times but never noticed until now. It feels like the right place. And if you later find a pressed petal tucked into your journal, a flower you didn't pick, you won't question it. Rain gives way to mist, and the village begins preparing for the Hungry Ghost Festival. Lanterns blossom along the streets like red fruit. Stalls pop up selling sugar cakes shaped like lotus blossoms, and everywhere you turn, there's the sound of distant drums and the clatter of paper being folded into spirit money. You volunteer at the temple, helping to string lanterns and hand out rice bowls. It's there you meet another stranger, a woman from the city whose sister was ghost married just last year. She died suddenly, the woman tells you, and my parents couldn't let her go alone. You ask, gently, if her sister had known the man she was married to. No, she says, but my parents found someone whose death matched her day. They said their stars aligned. She pauses, then adds, it's strange. I thought I would hate it, but I think it helped. The woman presses something into your hand. It's a small charm, shaped like a bell, etched with her sister's name. She loved history, she says, almost laughing. She would have loved this strange little story you're chasing. You wear the charm that night. At the festival's peak, villagers light lanterns and float them down the river. The water glows like a ribbon of stars, each flame bobbing softly, carrying messages for the unseen. You think of all the ghost brides and grooms whose names have been lost, and of the families who lit flames on their behalf anyway. You float your own lantern, plain and unmarked, save for one line scratched inside. No one is forgotten who is gently remembered. And as it drifts away, you feel something loosen, something you hadn't even known was tight. The river accepts it all. Names, doubts, poems, mismatched marriages, unfinished letters, and those quiet, everyday hopes that the dead might still be listening. And maybe, just maybe, they are. By now, your room at the inn has become a kind of archive in its own right. Stacks of translated folk tales line your nightstand. A scarf from the temple hangs above your bed. There's a pressed chrysanthemum taped into your notebook, gifted by the baker's wife after a long conversation about her cousin's posthumous marriage. And in the corner, wrapped carefully in cloth, sits a bundle of ghost marriage letters. They're copies, of course. The originals are far too fragile, but still, they hold weight. There's one letter in particular you keep returning to. It's unsigned, written in soft charcoal script, dated 1887. It begins plainly. To the family of the girl who drowned in the northern river, please accept my apologies for contacting you in this manner. And from there, the voice unfolds, hesitant, grieving, oddly tender. The writer claims to be the older brother of a young man recently deceased, whose spirit, he believes, has been appearing in dreams. Dreams where the dead brother says he recognizes the drowned girl's soul, that they are meant to be joined. The brother continues, I know this sounds like madness, but my brother has never lied, not even in death. I believe this union could bring peace to both sides. You reread the letter many times, not just for the historical content, though there is plenty. Mentions of auspicious dates, offerings of gold foil, references to feng shui masters. No, you return for the voice, the quiet hope, the delicate grief. Historians still argue whether these letters were formulaic or deeply personal. Some see them as pragmatic transactions between families. Others believe they were acts of poetic mourning. You're starting to think, why not both? You visit a calligraphy master who specializes in historical scripts. He examines the copies and makes a soft sound in his throat. Not rushed, he says. Not written for show. This person meant what they wrote. You ask if he's seen many like this. He shrugs. Only in temples and dreams. Later that day, you're invited to a tea ceremony at a retired school teacher's home. She tells you ghost marriage was once a quiet option for women without dowries, or for those whose families felt they'd been cursed by early deaths. Sometimes, she says, the girl would choose the spirit herself. You blink. She could choose? Oh yes, the teacher says, pouring tea with a steady hand. If she believed someone had followed her into death, or if she simply liked the idea of companionship. You picture that, a girl in mourning robes, whispering a name to the wind, lighting incense not for grief, but for invitation. Back at the inn, you add another entry to Malian's letter. They say some ghost brides chose their grooms. If you did, I hope he danced with you at the wedding feast. I hope he poured you a second cup of tea without asking. I hope he listens when you sing. You're not sure where these words come from. They don't feel like research anymore. They feel like remembering. That evening, a thunderstorm rolls through. The power flickers and the streets go dark. From your window you watch lightning sketch the outline of distant hills. In the silence, a dog barks once, then stops. And from the street below, just barely, you hear laughter. Children, perhaps, or something older. You open the window and let the rain blow in. The ghost marriage letters on your desk flutter once, twice, then settle. You close your eyes, not because you're tired, but because sometimes stories ask to be heard in darkness. And in that darkness you imagine them, the ghost couples, the letter writers, the quiet ceremonies no history book has ever recorded. You see them dancing beneath trees, balancing bowls of rice, trading laughter like gifts. And somehow, without meaning to, you're dancing with them. The last week of your stay arrives without fanfare. No grand realization, no dramatic finale. Just a gradual tapering, like a candle burning low, not out, just softer. Your days slow even further. You take fewer notes, you walk more. You find yourself returning to places that hold no academic significance whatsoever. A footbridge with cracked tiles, a fig tree whose roots twist around a rock like it's trying to remember something. The innkeeper's niece paints your portrait in watercolor. So you won't be forgotten, she says. You look like a slightly confused sea captain. You keep it anyway. One morning, you follow a procession. It winds through the village in silence. No drums, no chants. Just people in white, walking with paper effigies and folded letters held close to their chests. A ghost wedding. This one, you learn, is for two girls. One died last month, the other 10 years ago. Their families never knew each other in life, but their dreams apparently did. Strange, the officiant says quietly, adjusting the jade beads on his robe. The younger one mentioned the older's name 3 nights before she died, a name she'd never heard before. You watch as they burn paper houses, paper cosmetics, paper iPhones. 2 tablets are placed side by side on a red cloth. A ribbon links them like a bridge. And then, in a small incense-fogged ritual, they are married. No fanfare, no legal seal, but the air shifts. You feel it. like someone's gone from whispering behind a door to finally entering the room. Historians still debate how queer ghost marriages were perceived. Were they dismissed as errors, quietly accepted, or honored as rare alignments of yin and yin? There are no clear records, only stories, passed down like lullabies, always changing in the retelling. Back in your room, you reread your letter to Mei Lian from the beginning. It's become a journal of sorts. Half personal reflection, half ghostly gossip column. You're not ready to stop writing it, and maybe you won't. On your final night, you're invited to dinner by the librarian who first showed you the archives. She serves you bitter melon stew and homemade rice cakes shaped like tiny birds. Over dessert, she says, "You should publish something. People forget this stuff." You nod, unsure. Later, as she walks you to the gate, she adds, "But don't write for people first. Write for her, for whoever she was." That night you dream vividly. You are back in the archive. Only now the cabinets open themselves, fluttering like wings. The letters inside aren't dusty or worn. They glow faintly, pulsing like fireflies. A figure sits at the far table, her hair pinned with silver combs. She looks up. She doesn't speak, but she smiles. And in that smile there is no sorrow, only recognition. You wake slowly. Rain patters against the window. The bell charm from the tea festival woman swings slightly on your doorknob, though there is no breeze. You begin packing. At the bottom of your suitcase, tucked between socks and travel receipts, you place the letter, still unfinished. That's the point. Some letters are never meant to end. You walk through the town one last time. The baker waves. The temple cat ignores you. You nod to the fig tree. It seems to approve. At the bus station, you sit with your luggage and watch people come and go. Some alone, some laughing, some staring at their shoes like the day is heavier than usual. You don't try to explain the story you've gathered. You couldn't. You simply close your eyes and let it rest. Let her rest. Or not. Maybe she's dancing again. You'll never know. But you'll keep writing. And that, perhaps, is the truest offering of all. Your train rumbles away from the village, its wheels carving a rhythm into the rails like some old mantra you can't quite translate. You watch through this window as green hills retreat, mist curling around them like sighs. For a long time, no one speaks. The passengers around you are lost in books, sleep, or the comforting ritual of scrolling. You stare at your reflection in the glass, slightly ghosted over the countryside. A tourist, a historian, a letter writer. What are you now? You open your notebook, the pages worn soft from use. You run your fingers over the last page of the letter to Mei Lian. No signature, just space. You're not ready to say goodbye. But goodbyes, you've learned, are rarely clean in China's ghost stories. Spirits don't vanish. They linger. They borrow your tea and steal your dreams and leave petals where your bookmarks used to be. In the seat beside you, a child stares out the opposite window, her hand tracing tiny shapes in the fogged-up glass. Circles, spirals, a flower, and then a character. Ming, bright. She doesn't seem to know what she's written, but you smile anyway. Historians still argue whether the practice of ghost marriage is fading or merely changing. Urban families are less inclined toward ritual. Officials have discouraged the burning of spirit paper. And yet, new forms arise. Online memorial sites, digital altars, text messages sent to the dead. Maybe ghost letters aren't relics. Maybe they've just changed fonts. You arrive in the city just before evening. Neon signs flicker to life. Traffic thickens. Everything feels louder, faster, more certain. And yet there's still that quiet thread. The sense that somewhere, tucked between phone towers and dumpling carts, the old stories are still humming. Not erased, just retold. You pass a newsstand. A tabloid headline screams about a haunted wedding dress. You laugh. The ghost marriage lives on. Back in your rented apartment, you unpack slowly. The scarf goes on a hook. The bell charm hangs near the window. The portrait by the innkeeper's niece finds a place on the bookshelf, just beside your favorite folktale collection. And then, one last ritual. You light a stick of incense. You open your notebook. You add a line, still thinking of you. And as the smoke curls upward, soft as a sigh, steady as memory, you finally feel it. You don't need to finish the letter. It was never meant to end. Because some stories, like some spirits, become part of the living. And that, dear listener, is perhaps the gentlest truth of all. And now, let the story soften. Like ink fading under candlelight. You've traveled far tonight, not just through rice fields and rainy streets, but through memory, ritual, and that beautifully strange space between history and heart. Let the details drift gently now, the feel of parchment beneath your fingers, the scent of incense on your clothes. The way a letter can carry a life even after that life has ended. Let your breath slow. Let the room around you fade just a little, like the mist curling over a village roof at dawn. There's no rush. The stories will wait. They always do. So if your mind still lingers by the riverbank where lanterns bob like fireflies, or in a dusty archive where secrets whisper through paper, let it. These are good places to pause. You are safe here. You are held. And somewhere, perhaps in another time, perhaps only in imagination, a girl in red silk is laughing softly at your curiosity. Maybe she's grateful. Maybe she's amused. Maybe she's dancing. Let your eyelids grow heavier now. Let the echoes fade. No need to turn the page. No need to finish the letter. You've already heard what you needed. Sleep well, traveler. You've been kind company. Until next time.